This is the fifth video in the Ethics and Legal Considerations for Animal Chiropractic. In this video, we're going to talk about the supervision and qualifications that are required in some of the specific state statutes. Now, let me begin with just some general observations about supervision. Um, in some states, supervision may not be defined. In some situations, they may not define the level of supervision that's required. When the different levels of supervision are defined, three levels that are fairly commonly defined are indirect, direct, and immediate. Indirect generally requires that the person providing supervision is available to communicate. They don't have to be in the immediate area. They don't have to be available to intervene immediately. Direct supervision generally means that the person providing the supervision needs to be on the premises or nearby if it's an outside area. Um, does not require that they be immediately available, whereas immediate supervision requires that they are available to intervene. So, from my perspective, immediate supervision generally means the person providing supervision is practically looking over the shoulder of the person delivering the service, whereas direct supervision means that they're on the premises and can provide assistance fairly quickly if required or requested. And indirect means that they're available to answer questions and to provide guidance or advice through communication if necessary. So here's an example of a definition of indirect supervision. It's from the Alabama Code. Uh, Supervising veterinarian has examined the animal and has given written or oral instructions, and the supervising veterinarian may be away from the premises. So in order to provide good supervision, and again, this examination of the animal and having a valid veterinary client-patient relationship is pretty consistent in these definitions of supervision. I don't think a veterinarian can effectively supervise if they don't have a valid veterinarian client uh, animal relationship. Alabama code also defines direct supervision, means that the veterinarian is on the premises and is quickly and easily available. Also still means the animal has been examined by the veterinarian and has provided clearance for the chiropractic care. Whereas immediate supervision, again from the Alabama code, veterinarian is in audible and visual range of the animal patient and the person treating the patient. Here's another definition from Arkansas of immediate supervision. Veterinarian's direct observation of with the opportunity to advise or intervene in each veterinary chiropractic procedure. Texas requires general supervision. There must be a valid veterinarian client-patient relationship, and that means that the veterinarian has examined the animal and made a determination that animal chiropractic will not likely be harmful to the patient. And the veterinarian also needs to have a written acknowledgement that chiropractic is an alternative therapy, and that acknowledgement needs to be signed by the client. Now, I have received some feedback that when the Board of Veterinary Medical Practitioners is making site visits, they will ask to see copies of those acknowledgments. So it's a fairly simple procedure to obtain that acknowledgement. I think it's a good part, an important part of getting informed consent anyway. So you might as well do it and document that you've done it, and that way you're in compliance with the state board. Texas rules do specify that non-veterinarians can perform animal chiropractic. They do require direct or general supervision. Now, direct supervision again means that the veterinarian is physically present on the same premises, but the statute does not require direct supervision. It is an alternative to general supervision, which means only that the veterinarian is readily available to communicate with the person they are supervising. So that allows veterinarians to send their patients to chiropractors, to animal chiropractors, to outside locations, and it doesn't have to be provided in the same, the treatment does not need to be provided in the same building where the veterinarian is present. And just as a caveat, the Texas rules also make it very clear that even though the veterinarian is only supervising this chiropractic care, the veterinarian is held to a level of professional judgment as would be exercised by the average Texas veterinarian who performs or recommends chiropractic or musculoskeletal manipulation treatments in their practice. So even though I think it allows for delegation and supervision, remember that delegation still leaves the veterinarian responsible for the treatment provided. Here's the rule from New Mexico. Non-licensed individuals are prohibited from practicing veterinary medicine except under the direct supervision of a New Mexico licensed veterinarian. Direct supervision includes uh, the following. The veterinarian must have an established veterinarian client-patient relationship. The treatment should be performed on the order of a licensed veterinarian. So I think an order probably needs to be more specific than just a general provide statement that the chiropractic care is appropriate. Now, the licensed veterinarian must be on the premises. Again, this is direct supervision, not general supervision. And the licensed veterinarian assumes liability for the quality of the treatment performed. And the fee needs to be paid to the veterinarian or the licensed facility, cannot be paid directly to the animal chiropractor. So while Texas allows general supervision, New Mexico does not allow general supervision. The other interesting thing to note about New Mexico is there's no requirement that the person providing the care be a chiropractor or have any training in animal chiropractic. Kentucky provides for veterinary assistants and for veterinary technicians. And veterinarians are allowed to delegate to veterinary technicians and to veterinary assistants. Generally, they're not going to be allowed to delegate to anyone other than those two persons. And they have to provide, be registered or licensed by the state and have to have appropriate training for their level of whether they're a technician or an assistant. Kentucky requires direct supervision with some exceptions, does not provide an exception for supervision or general supervision of chiropractic care. So I would assume that any animal chiropractic that is delegated must be under the direct supervision of the veterinarian. I also believe that the care needs to be delegated to a veterinary assistant or a veterinary technician, not to somebody who does not meet those qualifications. California has a fairly extensive regulation on animal chiropractic. It's very clear initially that musculoskeletal manipulation, when performed upon animals, constitutes the practice of veterinary medicine. So there's no question in their mind that this belongs or is regulated by the Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. And they begin by setting out the requirements for a veterinarian. A veterinarian can perform musculoskeletal manipulation only if first they've examined the animal. Secondly, they've assumed responsibility for making clinical judgments about the animal. And they've made a determination that musculoskeletal manipulation will not be harmful to the animal. Thirdly, they have discussed with the owner the course of treatment. Fourth, they are readily available to provide treatment or follow-up care or treatment of adverse reactions. And fifthly, that the veterinarian has assigned acknowledgement, again, where the owner has acknowledged that animal chiropractic is an alternative that is a non-standard veterinary therapy. So that's the requirements just for a veterinarian. to provide musculoskeletal manipulation. California's rules go on and identify that licensed chiropractors may work under the direct supervision of a veterinarian to provide musculoskeletal manipulation. In order to be a supervising veterinarian, the veterinarian has to meet all the requirements in the previous section. That is, they have to have an examination, take responsibility, discussion with the client's owner or the patient's owner, be readily available, and have assigned acknowledgement. And then after completing the initial examination, the chiropractor, the animal chiropractor, is required to consult with the supervising veterinarian to confirm that musculoskeletal manipulation is appropriate and to coordinate any complementary treatment. In the animal hospital setting, the supervisor veterinarian shall be on the premises. Okay, this is consistent with the idea of direct supervision. The veterinarian needs to be on the premises. In a range setting, the supervising veterinarian shall be in the general vicinity of the treatment area. The supervising veterinarian is also responsible to ensure that accurate and complete records are maintained. So the records that are created by the animal chiropractor become part of the veterinarian's records. So regulations go on to specify direct supervision means the supervisor is physically present at the same location where the care is provided and that an examination has taken place. The supervising veterinarian has some additional duties. They have to determine the competency of the person who's going to perform the delegated task. They also have to, the supervising veterinarian rather, must make all decisions about diagnosis, treatment, management, future disposition of the animal. And the supervising veterinarian, again, must have examined the animal patient. So you'll see a little bit of repetition as you go through these regulations. When I see repetition like that, like the examination requirement showing up over and over, that tells me that's probably an important consideration. The supervision requirements also go on to say that when the supervising veterinarian has ceased the relationship with the chiropractor must immediately terminate such treatment. So if the veterinarian decides that they don't trust or don't want to work with the chiropractor any longer, the chiropractor cannot continue to treat patients even though they may have existing orders to provide treatment for those patients. And a chiropractor who fails to follow these rules is engaged in the unlicensed practice of veterinary medicine. Veterinarian who fails to follow these rules is engaged in unprofessional conduct. Both cases that can be subject to disciplinary action by the state boards. So Louisiana also has a rule that's going to require supervision. Alternative therapy may be performed by a layperson only with one, an order or prescription from a licensed veterinarian. Second, where there is an established veterinarian client-patient relationship with the supervising veterinarian. Third, where the care is provided under the veterinarian's direct supervision. Fourth, that there is written informed consent of the owner to the care. And the statute also requires that this is not just any layperson. The layperson must possess a license, registration, or certification, or must possess verification of an educational level acceptable by the board to be providing that alternative care or therapy. Direct supervision in Louisiana, like we've seen in the other states, means that the veterinarian is on the premises. Likewise, the supervising veterinarian is held accountable for proper diagnosis and treatment, including the work that's been delegated, compliance with proper documentation, and that they are accountable for maintaining confidentiality of the information. Alternative therapy is defined as including animal chiropractic treatment. The regulations also go on to explain a little bit more about the written informed consent. Um, which brings us to the Michigan statute, which also allows performance of animal chiropractic under supervision. Licensee who holds a license other than a health profession subfield license may delegate to a licensed or unlicensed individual who is otherwise qualified by education, training, or experience. In other words, a veterinarian, this is under the Veterinary Practice Act, a veterinarian may delegate to other professionals who are not veterinarians, but are qualified to perform the selected acts that fall within the scope of practice of their profession and will be performed under the licensee's supervision. Supervision is a general supervision, continuous availability of direct communication, and the availability of the veterinarian on a regularly scheduled basis to review the practice of the supervised individual, to provide consultation, review records, to further educate the supervised individual, um, and to verify that the predetermined procedures are being followed. Mississippi will also allow for animal chiropractic under supervision. It allows for chiropractors to work either under a referral basis or under the direct and immediate supervision, not or, but and under the direct and immediate supervision. And direct supervision, Mississippi Code does not define the direct and immediate supervision, but based on the definitions we've seen in other states, I expect direct supervision is going to require that the veterinarian be on the same premises where the care is being provided. And Nebraska has two different standards. One is where they allow delegation to someone who is a healthcare professional, and the second is where they allow delegation to someone who is a licensed animal therapist. Now, a chiropractor, I think, can fall under either category depending upon the registration that they have made with the state and the qualifications they have met prior to making that registration. So if you're working with somebody who is a healthcare professional but not an animal therapist, the Veterinary Medicine Act allows the provision of animal care under the immediate supervision of a veterinarian. Immediate supervision, again, means that the chiropractor is on the premises. I'm sorry, that the supervising veterinarian is on the premises and is in direct eyesight and hearing range of the animal and the veterinary technician or unlicensed assistants. So that's going to be not just, I think, on the premises, but I think in the same room at where the care is being provided. Now, Nebraska also has a section that allows for registration as an animal therapist or as a veterinary orthopedic manipulation chiropractic technique. A licensed animal therapist has more discretion to act on their own. The licensed animal therapist may act with a letter of referral. The licensed therapist has to maintain records for at least 3 years after the last treatment of the client, or you shouldn't be treating the client, but last treatment of the patient or the last contact with the client. They have to have adequate training. Healthcare therapy is consistent with the licensed animal therapist training required for license, which is referred to in another section. Letter of referral needs to include a veterinary medical diagnosis and evaluation. So it can't just be a blanket or a vague referral. It needs to be based on a specific veterinary client-patient relationship and a diagnosis and evaluation. And it must be made, that examination, that diagnosis must have been made within 90 days immediately preceding the date of the healthcare therapy. So it can't be an old diagnosis. It needs to be a new, or at least a relatively recent examination of the patient. The animal therapist is required to make monthly reports. Now, monthly reports are probably not adequate, in my opinion. I think reports should be made more frequently than that, if for no other reason than to build up the relationship between the professionals and to improve the communication between the professionals. Now, providing a report a month after something has occurred is probably too late in most circumstances. Now, if you're working in Nebraska, if you were a veterinarian, you are delegating to an animal therapist, the regulations, or the statute rather, specifically specifies that a licensed veterinarian is not liable for damages caused to the animal. So the animal therapist has that liability, not the supervising veterinarian. So again, in Nebraska, there's two options. Under either option, there are certain tasks that are limited to the veterinarian. Only the veterinarian can make a diagnosis or prescribe any treatment, drugs, medications, perform surgery, or administer the rabies vaccine. So Nebraska gives you a little more flexibility as an animal therapist than you would have otherwise. Uh, Ohio, likewise, like Nebraska, has two tiers: allied medical support, where direct supervision is required, and animal chiropractors, where no supervision is required. So for the allied medical support, that includes a licensed chiropractor, and they may assist a licensed veterinarian if they meet all of these requirements. There must be a valid veterinary client-patient relationship with the veterinarian. There must be direct veterinary supervision. The allied medical support individual must receive informed written client consent. And in the case of animal chiropractic, I would assume that includes consent or acknowledgement that chiropractic is an alternative to traditional veterinary care. The veterinarian maintains responsibility for the patient, keeps the patient's records. In the event the board is investigating a complaint, or in any case, the board has a right to inspect the facilities of an allied medical support individual to confirm that it's adequately maintained and adequate for the care of animals. Direct veterinary supervision means that the veterinarian is in the immediate area within audible and visual range. In other words, the veterinarian needs to be available to help if necessary, but does not need to be looking over the shoulder of the person providing the services. So that's in Ohio with allied medical support. I'm sorry, I need to include this too. Veterinary client relationship uh, means that the veterinarian has assumed responsibility and that the client has agreed to follow the veterinarian's instructions. The veterinarian has sufficient knowledge of the patient and has seen the patient recently, and that the veterinarian is readily available for follow-up evaluation in the event the patient suffers any adverse reactions. Okay, so that's allied medical support in Ohio. Ohio also recognizes animal chiropractic practitioners. Animal chiropractic practitioners are required to register with the state chiropractic board. They may provide animal chiropractic only to the types of animals on which they have received training, and they may provide animal chiropractic without supervision by a licensed veterinarian. Animal chiropractor is required to complete an application of care form, which is described in more detail in the next few slides here. Chiropractors required to maintain the medical record for at least 3 years. The application for care form must include at least a statement that the chiropractor is not a licensed veterinarian, so there's no confusion about your qualifications. Must include a statement that chiropractic is an alternative therapy. Statement that or rather a question about whether the patient has been seen by a licensed veterinarian, and a question about whether the licensed veterinarian has provided a diagnosis. Because it's only requiring a question, it seems like the animal chiropractic practitioner would be allowed to see animals that have not been seen by a licensed veterinarian or have not received a diagnosis by a licensed veterinarian. And lastly, of course, the application needs to include a statement authorizing the chiropractor to provide animal chiropractic to the animal. The statute is also very clear with animal chiropractic practitioners. Again, the veterinarian is not liable. It's only the animal chiropractic practitioner who would be liable for any malpractice that occurs. Now, Ohio, and even though they authorize animal chiropractic practitioners, you should be aware that the definition of animal chiropractic is somewhat limited. It includes the evaluation and treatment of an animal's vertebral or extremity joint dysfunction through spinal, joint, or musculoskeletal manipulative therapy or soft tissue therapy. Now, if you start doing other things, selling vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, enzymes, glandular extracts, botanical substances, etc., that's beyond the scope of the practice of chiropractic. And if you're practicing as an animal chiropractic practitioner without supervision of a veterinarian, you cannot provide these other services. They can be provided only by a licensed veterinarian or under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. An animal chiropractic practitioner is defined as a licensed chiropractor. So you have to have a valid license from the Board of Chiropractic Examiners. You also have to have certification from the AVCA or one of the other agencies recognized by that statute. So Nebraska and Ohio have that two-tiered system where there is one tier where there's much closer supervision and one tier where there is no supervision. Oregon allows for treatment when the animal has been referred to the chiropractic physician. There is a limited definition of what animal chiropractic treatment is. The chiropractic physician is required to maintain complete and accurate records for a period of at least 3 years. Pennsylvania allows for treatment under direct supervision by a veterinarian. Direct supervision, like we've seen before, requires that the supervising veterinarian be on the premises and be easily and quickly available to assist. South Carolina does not make any specific mention of animal chiropractic, but has a general rule for delegation. It allows for delegation where the veterinarian has verified the qualifications of the person and the delegating veterinarian remains responsible for the general care of the patient. Again, the veterinarian or the aides that are being supervised must have the training, expertise, and skills required. The veterinarian is responsible for verifying and documenting those qualifications and responsible for the care of the patient. Supervision is an appropriate degree of supervision. Doesn't specify whether that's immediate, direct, or general. South Carolina does define direct supervision as, again, being on the premises and within immediate vocal communication of the person being supervised. They have a statement um, on the website of the Board of Veterinary Medical Examiners. Yeah, a statement on the website is not a regulation. It's not binding like a regulation, but it is a pretty good indication that unless the board has a change in its membership, that they're going to honor this provision. And it specifies that a licensed chiropractor may work under the direct supervision of a veterinarian as long as the supervising veterinarian determines that musculoskeletal manipulation will not be harmful and discuss the course of treatment with the owner of the animal. So that's a pretty specific permission, I believe, for licensed chiropractors to provide animal chiropractic care, again, under the supervision of a licensed veterinarian. South Carolina is also going to require a signed acknowledgement from the owner that chiropractic or musculoskeletal manipulation is an alternative therapy. And also, of course, if the veterinarian ceases the relationship with the chiropractor must immediately terminate the treatment. Wyoming, again, I'm going to look at a general rule for delegation. Um, Veterinarians or practice veterinary medicine may only be practiced by a licensed veterinarian um, or somebody, an employee of a licensed veterinarian acting under the responsible supervision of the practicing veterinarian. So Wisconsin, again, I think would allow some delegation, but it's very clear that it's limited to employees and would not include an independent contractor or a animal chiropractor running an independent business. The veterinarian is professionally and legally responsible for the care, and the supervising veterinarian must have a valid veterinarian client patient relationship. Licensee cannot authorize the performance of surgery, the diagnosis and prognosis, or prescribing drugs, medicines, or appliances. The supervising veterinarian is responsible for making sure that the individual providing the care is providing care within the scope of the orders or the assignment, and that they are within the capabilities of the individual, and that the services are provided only at the customary place of business. A licensee, a veterinarian, shall not supervise from a separate location. So I think that's going to require that the supervising veterinarian be on the premises where the care is being provided. So now there are a couple states, in addition to the states we discussed earlier where there's a two-tiered system, there are a couple of states that allow adjusting without supervision. The Oklahoma Veterinary Practice Act cannot prohibit a licensed chiropractor who is certified by the Board of Chiropractic Examiners to engage in animal chiropractic. It also cannot prohibit a licensed chiropractor who is not certified from providing chiropractic treatment to an animal referred to the chiropractic physician. So a chiropractic physician may engage in the practice of animal chiropractic if certified to do so by the board, or if they're not certified, if the animal has been referred to the physician. So one provision comes out of the Chiropractic Act, one provision comes out of the Veterinary Practice Act. So the two professions are coordinating, providing the same authority here. Oklahoma does have a definition for animal chiropractic diagnosis and treatment. It does not include x-rays, surgery, medications, or traditional veterinary care. Arkansas also allows chiropractors to practice animal chiropractic if they're licensed to practice chiropractic. They're certified by the AVCA. And although immediate supervision used to be required, it is no longer required in Arkansas. Utah also allows the practice of animal chiropractic by licensed chiropractic physicians who have completed the AVCA's program. Utah used to require a written referral by a licensed veterinarian. That requirement has been removed from the statute, so it's no longer necessary to have that written referral. Uh, Nevada also allows practice by a chiropractor who has obtained a registration certificate and complied with the provisions of the Nevada Administrative Code. Um, they can practice under the direction. It doesn't say supervision, and it doesn't specify. So I'm making an assumption here that direction is something a little less specific than general supervision. But under the direction of a veterinarian who has an established veterinarian client patient relationship, and the chiropractor assumes individual liability. So to me, that indicates that the veterinarian would not be responsible for any malpractice committed by the animal chiropractor. Nevada's regulations go on to specify that the veterinarian is not required to supervise the chiropractor during the animal chiropractic care, and the veterinarian is not liable for the acts or omissions of the chiropractor. So it's under the direction, and I'm not sure how to clarify what under the direction means, but without supervision. Nevada requires that you keep the records for at least 4 years. Um, and curiously, even though the veterinarian is only providing direction, the chiropractor is required within 48 hours after the initial visit to transmit a complete copy of the record to the veterinarian, and same after each subsequent visit with the animal. So even though it's only under the direction of the supervising of the veterinarian, um, the veterinarian's receiving pretty frequent updates on how the care is progressing. Although I didn't see any time limits like this in any other state regulations, I think that's a pretty appropriate. If a animal chiropractor is providing care under supervision, they ought to be creating records and sharing those records fairly promptly after the visits with the animals, and it should be done after each visit. Veterinarians required to include the copy of the medical record. There are specific requirements for what needs to be in the medical record. I'm not going to read that list to you, but it's more specific than anything I've seen for working with human patients. Minnesota also allows for chiropractors to engage in animal chiropractic if the uh, chiropractor is registered and the animal has been referred by a veterinarian. Registration is going to require completion of the AVCA certification or one of the other agencies. A chiropractor must keep the records for at least 3 years and make treatment notes and records available to the patient's owner, as well as the referring veterinarian if requested. If a chiropractor in Minnesota is treating animals and humans in the same facility, they need to post a conspicuous sign informing consumers that animals are treated on the premises. They're also going to be required to get 6 hours of continuing education in animal chiropractic diagnosis and treatment. Minnesota defines animal chiropractic diagnosis and treatment. Um, does not include surgery, medications, or traditional veterinary care and diagnosis. Missouri allows animal chiropractic practitioners to be either licensed veterinarians or individuals with chiropractic licenses who have been certified by the AVCA. Missouri is going to require a referral, so it's not without supervision, but some supervision. And the veterinarian making the referral must have a valid current veterinarian client-patient relationship. The referring veterinarian may limit the number of visits or the length of treatment, either in the referral or after consultation with the animal chiropractor. Missouri defines animal chiropractic, or I'm sorry, allows for animal chiropractic shall not be construed to require supervision by a licensed veterinarian to practice or to allow the diagnosing of an animal, the performing of surgery, dispensing of medications, etc. Statute in Missouri defines the veterinarian client-patient relationship. As we've seen in the other statutes, it means the veterinarian has assumed responsibility. The client has agreed to the client or veterinarian client-patient relationship. The veterinarian has enough knowledge of the animal to make a diagnosis or a preliminary diagnosis. The veterinarian has recently seen and is personally acquainted with the animal, and the practicing veterinarian is readily available for follow-up care if there's any adverse reaction or failure of the prescribed course of treatment. Colorado allows licensed chiropractors who are registered to perform animal chiropractic when that care is within the scope of practice for chiropractors. Licensed chiropractor who's not registered may perform animal chiropractic only under the direct on-premises supervision of a veterinarian. Anyone who is not licensed as a chiropractor or a veterinarian may not perform animal chiropractic. So that's going to limit veterinarians when they delegate. In most of the states, they're going to be free to delegate to any layperson. But in Colorado, I'm interpreting that statute as meaning they can delegate only to a licensed chiropractor to perform animal chiropractic. Colorado does require a veterinary medical clearance, which means the veterinarian has examined the patient, has reached a diagnosis, provided a written clearance. The veterinary clearance must take place before any animal chiropractic treatment occurs. And once the veterinary medical clearance has been received, the chiropractor, not the veterinarian, is responsible for developing the plan of care for the animal. A licensed veterinarian who provides veterinary medical clearance may require a veterinarian's presence. So it's at the discretion of the veterinarian, depending upon their acceptance or acknowledgement of the qualifications of the licensed chiropractor. A chiropractor and the veterinarian shall continue professional collaboration as necessary for the well-being of the animal patient. That's one of those requirements that I think really should exist everywhere. And I think it's unfortunate that there is sometimes professional jealousy or professional competition that prevents us from having that collaboration for the benefit of the patient. Chiropractors required to maintain the records for at least 3 years, and of course must provide a copy of the records to the veterinarian on the veterinarian's request. Disciplinary action may be taken by the Board of Chiropractic Examiners if they receive a complaint about animal chiropractic. They will forward it to the State Board of Veterinary Medicine for its review and advisory recommendations. I didn't say that very well. In Colorado, the chiropractors will be disciplined by the Board of Chiropractic Examiners, but before making their decision, they will reach out to the Board of Veterinary Medicine for their recommendations. Colorado does require separate treatment rooms. You cannot treat animals and humans in the same treatment rooms. Um, if a chiropractor allows animals in their office, chiropractor is responsible for their proper care and feeding and shall have them vaccinated and licensed as appropriate, shall maintain compliance at all times with sanitation requirements. Only a licensed chiropractor who's qualified and registered in Colorado to perform animal chiropractic can use titles like animal chiropractor, animal adjuster, equine chiropractor, equine adjuster. Chiropractors cannot use the titles veterinary chiropractor or veterinary adjuster unless the chiropractor also happens to have a license to practice veterinary medicine. Nothing in the section prohibits a licensed veterinarian from using the titles animal adjuster or equine adjuster. So Colorado does have a specific definition of animal chiropractic. Uh, Means diagnosing and treating animal vertebral subluxation through chiropractic adjustment of the spine or extremities. Does not include, and it includes several other things that I did not put on the slide. It does not include taking x-rays, does not include acupuncture, does not include magnetic or other non-manual treatment techniques, colonics, colored light therapy, homeopathy, radionics, or vitamin therapy, or venipuncture. Colorado also goes on to define the vertebral subluxation, and the diagnosis usually involves evaluation of gait and radiographs. But remember, you can't take x-rays, you have to use somebody else's x-rays. Idaho says that its uh, uh, statute limiting the practice of veterinary medicine shall not be construed to prohibit an allied health professional from providing care under the indirect supervision of a licensed veterinarian. Allied health professional includes chiropractors. Indirect supervision means that the direct supervising veterinarian does not need to be on the premises, but is available for immediate contact by telephone, radio, or other means. Now, in today's world, it's very rare that you would not be available for immediate contact. That also means that the supervising chiropractor is given written or oral instructions for treatment. The animal's been examined by the supervising veterinarian is acceptable, and the animal, if previously anesthetized, has recovered to the point of being conscious and sternal. Wisconsin's rule is that a veterinarian may make a referral to a client for treatment by a license holder in another profession using complementary alternative or integrative therapies, which we'll see are defined later as including chiropractic. So complementary medicine includes chiropractic medicine. The veterinarian must have a valid veterinarian client-patient relationship. Um, so that's a lot of information to digest. And again, what I recommend is whatever state you're practicing in, you you will need to take some time to look at the regulations for both chiropractic and for veterinary medicine to identify what your authority may or may not be. Now, again, for veterinarians, this is not a particularly tough issue. You're going to have authority to provide any care basically for animals. You do want to be familiar with these rules, though, if you're going to delegate or work with an animal chiropractor to make sure that the animal chiropractor is behaving appropriately. And to me, the bottom line questions that these regulations need to be answering is first, which veterinarians should be allowed to do animal chiropractic? Is it all veterinarians, or should there be some requirement for additional training or qualifications? Oklahoma does require some malpractice coverage as well as appropriate training for veterinarians who hold themselves out as being involved in animal chiropractic. So the first question is for veterinarians. The second question is for chiropractors. Which chiropractors should be allowed to work on animals? Um, in most states, if the care is provided under the appropriate level of supervision by a licensed veterinarian, there really isn't any additional training required. And for that matter, in most states, the licensed chiropractors, don't have any additional authority than a layperson. Now, some states are going to require AVCA or other certifications. Oklahoma is going to require certification or referral by a licensed veterinarian. So if you're either a certified animal chiropractor or if you're a licensed chiropractor but you're not certified, you need a referral from a licensed veterinarian. So in some of the states, a small handful of the states, I should say, they have started to address the question of which chiropractors should be allowed to adjust animals. I think the other question that's out there is what about laypersons? If a chiropractor, or I'm sorry, a licensed veterinarian can delegate to a layperson who may or may not be an employee in their office, then what are the standards for that layperson? Um, there may be one standard for treating your own animals, which I think is pretty wide open. But what about the layperson working under a veterinarian supervision? What level of supervision is appropriate, and what training should that layperson have before they're allowed to provide animal chiropractic care? Another issue that seems to be pretty consistent in the statutes that address it is a statement about the owner's consent. Uh, Animal chiropractic care is an alternative therapy. Musculoskeletal manipulation is an alternative therapy. It is not traditional veterinary care. And clients or owners should be advised that this is not traditional veterinary care. The veterinarian should provide some kind of clearance to indicate that the animal is unlikely or to be injured by musculoskeletal manipulation. And the veterinarian or the owner may place a limit on the care or may place a limit on their authorization and should include an authorization to treatment. And I think the owner's consent should also specify the involvement of the veterinarian. Is the veterinarian just making a referral? What is the responsibility of the veterinarian, if any, relative to the responsibility of the animal chiropractor? And as we saw in a handful of the states, the animal chiropractor carries all of the liability for any of their acts or omissions. And that should be spelled out to the owner so that they know who's responsible if there's a bad result. Or if the veterinarian is closely involved in supervising, the owner should be aware of that as well so that they know where the veterinarian should be and how the veterinarian should be involved in the care of the animal. Now, the other issue that seems to come up is treating animals and humans in the same clinic. You got to be sensitive to that. Many humans have allergies to animals, and for a chiropractor who's providing care for human patients, you need to be aware of those allergic conditions, and you need to be taking steps to make sure your office is not collecting pet dander, and that it's cleaned properly so that you're less likely to trigger allergic reactions, and to also make sure you have appropriate air filtration systems in place. When you have animals and humans in the same place, you also need to be aware of the risk of injury to patients or to employees by animals who may not be under the control or may not be under very good control by their owners. And there's also some legal requirements you need to be aware of. Many states, including Texas, in their chiropractic regulations, provide that it's grossly unprofessional conduct to expose a patient to unsanitary conditions. Likewise, Minnesota says table and equipment used for animals shall not be used for human patients. And Colorado, as I mentioned previously, requires separate treatment rooms, tables, and equipment for animals and for humans. So it's something to consider if you're working on animals and humans in the same clinic. Is that a good idea? And is there a workaround or some strategies you need to consider to minimize the risk and minimize the or to maintain the sanitary condition of your office? And last comment I want to make about these regulations, I've not talked about racing commissions, but in states that allow for racing either of horses or of dogs, the racing commissions may have very different rules about who can provide care and how the care can be provided. For purposes of this class, I've not tried to include those regulations, but certainly if you're working on animals that are used for racing, you need to be keenly aware of any specific rules or specific oversight by a racing commission to make sure you don't violate those rules. Violating those rules can become a very expensive situation, very costly violation. So just kind of as a brief moment of, that's a lot of serious information. So just kind of as a brief moment of a mental break, we'll go over these quotes briefly about dogs. Ann Landers, don't accept your dog's admiration as conclusive evidence that you are wonderful. Your dog will admire their owner, always. We give dogs time we can spare, space we can spare, and love we can spare. And in return, dogs give us their all. It's the best deal man has ever made. Will Rogers, if there's no dogs in heaven, then when I die, I want to go where they went. Andy Rooney, the average dog is a nicer person than the average person. Charles Schultz, all his life, he tried to be a good person. Many times, however, he failed, for after all, he was only human. He wasn't a dog. James Thurber, if I have any beliefs about immortality, it is that certain dogs I have known will go to heaven and very, very few persons. If your dog is fat, you aren't getting enough exercise. Money will buy you a pretty good dog, but it will not buy you the wag of his tail. Just some parting thoughts about dogs.